How's it going today here at Nomad Mobile Maintenance and Repair? Today we are finishing up on a 1993 Toyota 4Runner. This has been an absolute problem child. This has been ongoing for a few months, in fact, and it has had multiple issues, and it has been red herring after red herring after red herring, and it is finally running and driving, and I am super pumped for this. So, customer states that we have a crank no start. Now, first thing I did when we came into this vehicle was I checked for cylinder compression to see if maybe the engine had jumped timing, because that's a very common issue on a lot of engines that use a timing belt. So we checked compression at cylinder 1, 3, and 5, and on all three of those cylinders we had 160 psi compression. This engine is super healthy. So once we saw that we had good compression, we checked to see if the distributor was 180 degrees out. And what we found was it didn't matter if it was one or the other. We tried to check for flash codes, but it wasn't illuminating the check engine light. And that should have been my first hint at the very beginning, that that's what I should have followed. But instead, I started looking towards ignition issues after I saw that it wasn't getting a spark. So we put the spark tester on a plug wire and we had nothing. Then we put a spark plug tester on the coil wire, had nothing. Put a spark plug tester on the igniter, had nothing. So then we proceeded to do diagnostic for workshop manual for Toyota for a no spark issue. And what they don't really tell you is if you've got a bad crank sensor, that it's going to cause you to have no spark, which is going to prevent you from having the fuel done. And this information's out there, but it's not in the flow diagram for doing the diagnostics. But we followed the wiring from the igniter to the ignition coil to the PCM. The PCM had already been replaced by another shop because they said that that was the issue. That didn't fix it. So the customer was going to give up and sell the vehicle. But working on it, we were checking all the wires from here to the PCM, and we had no issues. We checked the wires from the distributor to the PCM, we had no issues. We began checking for other things that could be causing this. We went inside the cab of the vehicle, and we pulled out the panel right here to see if maybe we have a blown fuse somewhere in that circuit, because this circuit also powers on the ignition, it powers on some of the other power sources for the PCM and stuff like that, and we had no issues there. We pulled the instrument cluster out to see if it was a burned bulb in the cluster, and maybe we were just not chasing anything other than a burnt bulb, but we checked the bulb and the bulb was good. So that's when I figured out that it was in fact a issue with the check engine light not coming on. So I did some researching, and there's a few things that can cause that on this vehicle, one of which is the mass airflow sensor. If it shorts to ground, it'll cause the check engine light to not turn on. So we unplugged that. That changed nothing. Then we looked into pulling individual connectors on the PCM, which is over here on the other side. So we started pulling connectors on the PCM, and when we pulled the center connector, check engine light came back on. So then we figured out that one of those wires in that bundle was shorting. So we did a resistance check on all the wires, we did a voltage check on all the wires, and wire number 6, I want to say, pin 6, was having some weird readings. When we looked to see what sensors are included in that, we had the mass airflow, we had the throttle position sensor, we had EGR sensor, coolant temp sensor. So then we plugged pin 6 back in, and we found every wire that was on the circuit. So we started pulling the harness apart, runs all the way back there, runs through there, comes up to the throttle position sensor, and we saw that there was some coolant right there on the back of the engine from the heater hose, and I was like, oh, it shorted out the coolant temp sensor, so we unplugged it, no change. Well, then we were looking at the throttle position sensor wiring, and it's cut back and now it's been fixed, but there was a short between two of the throttle position sensor wires. They had rubbed together and were shorting out. So we got that fixed, and the engine came to life. Super exciting. I was absolutely thrilled. But when we got it to come to life, we then had a code that was 1.4, something like that, flash code 1.4, basically saying that the distributor signal was weak or bad. It was a distributor code. So then we looked at the wiring of the distributor, and we had found that one of those wires had a poor ground connection. And being that we saw that it had a poor ground connection on that, we went ahead and replaced the wires on this and the wires on this, because when you look at the flow chart, it basically said it could be this, it could be this. You know, I had a bad ground. I just went ahead and redid all of them. That code went away. Then we ended up starting the engine. It was running, but it was idling super high, about 1500 RPM. When we saw that, we had a diagnostic code for 4.1 or 5.1 throttle position sensor circuit high. So when we were looking at the throttle body, we noticed that the throttle was stuck back right about there. And we took off the throttle position sensor because we don't see that there's any cables that were tight. We didn't find anything that was out of the ordinary. And we pulled the throttle position sensor, and that, I guess, just went bad and got stuck back and froze there. So fortunately, there was another throttle position sensor that the customer had purchased. We installed that throttle position sensor, and the engine came to life and runs beautifully. We had also an issue with one of the plug wires. When we first started it, it had come apart and was definitely not firing on. It was actually cylinder number 4 or 6 had come apart. And then cylinder number 5 had come apart. So those two wires definitely needed to be replaced. What else did we do on this? That's about it. I'm sure there's some more things that we've done on this vehicle. This has been so much checking and rechecking to make sure that all the values are good. We did have a colossal vacuum leak. The PCV valve had come undone at some point and was sucking in massive vacuum, so we fixed that. That hose right there was sucking in vacuum, so we fixed that. The throttle body boot had come undone, or it was removed just, for testing or whatever, so we got that tightened up. Not anything too crazy there, but the engine runs, drives, and my work here is done. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Nomad Mobile Maintenance and Repair.